a magic spell of the mind power, like the voodoo idea, that he sees, he feels that you are confident, and that saps his confidence. Maybe it works both ways.
Now, can someone give a voodoo curse on someone by not practicing voodoo?
Yes, I think that although the Voodoo and Santeria and the Obeah mystical, magical religions, although they have their set forms and their liturgies and their rituals and the talismans and the spells, although there are these formal ways of doing it, there are also totally informal ways of doing it. Look at a situation, and I'm sure that you find this in every profession, in every office, in every shop, in every factory, every workplace, that I've gone into a staff meeting in the days when I was a high school principal, and there'll be one or two people who will come in, and their contribution to that meeting is totally positive. They have the good of the school at heart. They have the good of the children and of their colleagues at heart. And you feel that they're giving something positive. Now, they're not going through any spell or incantation. They're just coming in as nice, happy, positive people, and they lift the whole meeting. And then there'll be one or two other characters who come in, and the minute they arrive, the whole meeting goes downhill. It's as if they were ill-wishing the whole situation. And I talked to other staff colleagues after and said, things were going great until X walked in, and then I felt the whole meeting froze, and all the plans we were putting forward didn't seem as if they were going to work. Now, it's as if people with a negative attitude to others, or who do not share the objective of the good and positive people, it's as if they have some negative force which they are able to project, and it takes a lot of doing to balance that. It takes a lot of positive thinking to do without. It's just like you need one small nail will puncture a tire, and it's a lot harder to get the tire repaired than it is to run over the nail. And I think that's how they can put, as it were, a type of curse, a type of negative vibes around the whole situation.
Of all the things you've studied with voodoo,
yeah,
did the work on zombieism bother you?
Well, it's certainly very strange, and it's an area that we gave a lot of time to in our research. And if I could go into it in some depth, because it's one of the things,
sure,
I think, which all our listeners tend to associate with the idea of voodoo. And zombies are created by a particular type of voodoo magician who is known either as a bokor, that's B-O-K-O-R, or a hungan, H-U-N-G-A-N. And he's a sort of magician priest, and he is the one whom the others believe is able to create zombies, to zombify people. Now, I think that the rational and sort of scientific explanation at the back of this is that either drugs are administered, and we know in Romeo and Juliet, Father Lawrence tried to solve the young lover's problems by giving Juliet a drug which would make her so unconscious, so deeply unconscious, that she would seem to be dead. And then, of course, all she has to do is wake up in the tomb, and young Romeo comes along, and it should all have ended happily. Of course, there was a communication breakdown, and it all ended tragically. But even in Shakespeare's time, there was the thought that drugs, poisons, toxins existed which would bring about a semblance of death. Now, we can well imagine that a religion that went back many centuries, that began in ancient Africa, where there are so many plants and herbs, and where the African medicine man, where the African witch doctor would have had all this knowledge passed on to him from father to son, from father to son, and a knowledge of herbs and what certain toxic herbs could do would certainly be a part of the wisdom of the wisest of those who had come from that background. So the first thing is drugs. The second is hypnotism. Now, it is, if we look at what certain yoga practitioners can do, there have been cases of yoga experts going into a kind of suspended animation and being buried for days at a time. They slow the heartbeat right down. And now that's a form of self-hypnosis, but it could possibly be done by a bokor or a hungan along with the drugs. So maybe it's drugs, maybe it's hypnotism, maybe it's both. Look at one or two cases. A girl called Felicia Felix Mentor. This happened in Haiti. She apparently died and was buried in 1907.
Okay.
In 1937, in zombified form, she was found again wandering around, and her family took her back and looked after her. Never recovered anything approaching her original mental powers, but that's 30 years after she was apparently dead. And another very interesting case concerned a guy called Clavius Narcisse. He was buried in 1962, and he reappeared in 1982 again in Haiti.
How does that happen?
Well, the mystery seems to be that the victim, the bokor or hungan, takes this victim and then, having used the drug or the hypnosis or a combination of the two, under cover of darkness, the interred body is removed and is then sold off as sort of zombie slave labor, because in very simple agricultural practices, the zombie was quite, where the agriculture is all done by hand, very sort of manually intensive, then a number of zombies, they don't have to be paid, and they can be fed on the simplest of diets just to keep them going, and they would be, shall we say, a reduced cost input for a farmer in a remote part of an area where they're not going to be, where their friends are not going to likely to come and find them. There's another case when we were talking about how's it done. A girl called Francina Elias apparently died and was buried in 1976. She reappeared 20 years later in 1996. The family took her back and went at once to see what it was they'd buried, and found, when it was dug up, the coffin was full of stone.
More to come, and also we'll open up the phone lines now. Perhaps you want to share a story, or you've got a question for our special guest tonight, Lionel Fanthorpe. I'm George Norrie. This is Coast to Coast AM.